Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be located. Welcome to our Azure Data Academy series. We're going to be doing a number of presentations all around things related to data in Azure. So the first set of content that we have is all focused on MySQL, specifically Azure Database for MySQL with a focus on the newest flexible server offering. And to help support that, we've got Avnish from our MySQL team here at Microsoft. Avnish will introduce himself in just a moment, but why don't we take a quick look at what the Azure Data Academy is? So we could advance the slide. Here we go. Azure Data Academy, you can get to it by going to aka.ms/ADA. That's for the Azure Data Academy. This is very similar to our previous Modern Analytics Academy series that we had at aka.ms/MAA, where we did a number of presentations around all things related to analytics. In this case, we wanted to focus on data, everything related to SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, Cosmos DB, all of our core data platform offerings that we have in Azure. And we wanted to focus on a lot of the challenges that our partners are experiencing. And sometimes it's about building a practice and getting up to speed on the latest technology. Sometimes it's about mitigating migration issues and modernization issues. And so this series is going to focus on that as we look at each technology we go through. So the next few that we've got with Avnish will focus on MySQL, covering a large number of those issues. We do appreciate all of your feedback and suggestions. So through the aka.ms/ada site, you are welcome to leave feedback there. It's part of our larger GitHub repository for partners, which is at aka.ms/partner readiness. The aka.ms/ada link, that'll take you to a deep link essentially directly to this series. And you can leave an issue feedback there in the GitHub repo or through our feedback form, which is aka.ms/ada feedback. If you would like to just give us a suggestion without putting something, say, publicly in the GitHub repo issues, you're welcome to use that as well. We look forward to seeing your feedback and seeing how we can address any concerns or questions you might have. So with that intro out of the way, what I'd like to do is allow Avnish to introduce himself, his role, and discuss MySQL for Azure and everything that's going on with the newest flexible server offering.
No, thank you, Brian. So hello, everybody. This is Avnish. I'm with Microsoft MySQL product team. I have been with Microsoft for past 4 years. And in my current role, I work with the customers and partner community to help with their customer base who are trying to modernize their MySQL footprint. And in this session, we will focus on the technical overview of Azure Database for MySQL Flexible Server, which is the new deployment option we introduced in November last year. So our database, MySQL database offering, is built on the core benefits of MySQL Community Edition. It's a fully managed, intelligent, and scalable PaaS offering, which has easy integration with Azure ecosystem, allowing you to do modern cloud native application development, whether these applications are OLTP application, web-based global applications, or analytical applications. And in Azure Microsoft, we have over 50 national, regional, and industry-specific compliance offerings that Azure Database for MySQL leverage as part of Microsoft Trusted Cloud Foundation of Security, Privacy, Compliance, and Transparency. And because our Azure Database for MySQL leverage Community Edition, it gives you full flexibility to lift and shift your on-premise workload and migrate to Azure. In addition to that, if you have workload running in a competing cloud provider, whether it's GCP or AWS, you can migrate from there without any changes or with minimum changes. And because of the community edition, you as a developer or administration continue to use the same tools you have been leveraging. And we have huge focus on the security to make sure that all your data is secure and compliant. And by default, all your data is encrypted at rest, whether it's including your database backups. And finally, your database service is highly available, which would allow you to focus on your application innovation without worrying about the database high availability. Because it's a fully managed service, we have automatic updates to make sure your database instance is healthy and secure. It has complete scalability options. You can scale across the tiers or within the tier. And it takes literally a few seconds to scale up or scale down from within the different configurations. And finally, if you're developing application in Azure using Azure services, you have best in industry uncapped defense and indemnification coverage. So in Flexible Server, we have 3 compute tiers: burstable, general purpose, and memory optimized. And within these tiers, you have complete flexibility to scale within the tier or scale across the tiers. So for example, if you have a development or POC and you want to start with burstable configuration, when you are ready to deploy this application in production, you can scale from burstable to general purpose. And later on, if your application requires more memory, then you can switch it to memory optimized. And within these tiers, you can scale from 1 to 2 vCore to up to 64 vCores. And for the memory, it really depends on the compute tier. In burstable, it's variable. But in general purpose or memory optimized, memory allocation depends on the memory allocation is 4 vCore, 4 GB per vCore, and 8 GB per vCore in memory optimized. We support storage size up to 16 terabyte. Minimum storage allocation is 20 GB. So let's review some of the key features we introduced in Azure Database for MySQL Flexible Server. So one of the key features we introduced is the high availability and protection against the zone failure. So in Flexible Server, you have the option to deploy MySQL instance in HA or non-HA configuration. So if you have a tier 3, tier 4 or non-production instances, you have the option to deploy with non-HA configuration. But if you're deploying database instance for tier 1 or tier 2 applications, you have the option to choose zone redundant deployment. And because not all the regions have multiple zones, we support both same zone HA as well as zone redundant HA. So if you do same zone HA deployment, it won't protect you against the zone failure, but it will help you in reducing the maintenance downtime because of the Azure maintenance we do every month. And every time we do the maintenance, we start with the standby instance. And once maintenance is done, we fail over your primary instance to the standby instance and stay over there. Later on, you have the option to fail it back if you prefer to go that route. And as part of this HA configuration, you would have a standby instance running in a secondary zone, and it's an async replication. We guarantee 0 data loss, whether it's a planned failover or unplanned failover. Now, IOPS in cloud are extremely important to maintain the performance SLH in addition to your compute and storage allocation. So in Azure Database for MySQL Flexible Server, minimum IOPS allocation is 360 GB, regardless of the storage allocation. And then maximum IOPS allocation is limited to the compute tier. So if your compute tier support, let's say 5,000 IOPS, then you can scale IOPS to up to 5,000. And once you are done with your peak workload, you can scale down your IOPS. So it gives you flexibility to scale IOPS based on your different workload requirements without worrying about allocating more storage to just for the sake of IOPS allocation. We also exposed a lot of server parameters in Flexible Server, which you can use to fine tune your database instance or enable different configuration. For example, if you want to monitor slow queries, there are certain parameters which we are exposing, and many of these parameters are dynamic or static. If there is a parameter which you are changing and it's static, then you have to restart your database instance. But dynamic parameters, as the name implies, you can change those parameters online. Now, so here in this diagram, on the left-hand side, we have 3 deployment options, which you can use to deploy your application. We have VM, which is an IaaS option, and then you have AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, and App Service. Both are PaaS option. You can use either of those options to deploy your application. And in the middle, we have a flexible server instance, where you have the compute to host your database instance. And then in the bottom, we have premium storage, where your data files and log files are hosted. And in the bottom, you have locally redundant storage to store your backup files. So one thing to highlight here is the zone configuration here. So as you notice here, your application as well as database instance are deployed in the same zone. So it gives you it offers significantly significantly reduced latency and maximize your performance experience. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we are also exposing a lot of parameters which you can use to fine tune your database instance. And finally, you can leverage thread pooling to increase your database performance by up to 50% or more. And in Flexible Server, we offer 2 different connectivity methods. One is public access, where you control your database access based on the firewall rules. And you can add individual IP addresses, or you can add a range of IP addresses. And then second option is the private access or VNet integration, where you deploy your database instance in a dedicated subnet within a VNet. And then within the same VNet, you can have another subnet for your application deployment. So if your database instance and application instance are deployed in the same VNet, then you don't need to do any additional network configuration. But if for any region your application is deployed in a different VNet than your database instance, then you will require VNet peering. And this is one of the nice feature we introduced in Flexible Server. So for example, if your application has multiple configuration to support development, test, staging, and production instances, then you have an option to use system managed schedule for your non-production instances, and then custom schedule, where you can choose 1 hour window any day of the week for your production instance. And we maintain 5 days gap between system schedule and custom schedule. So it allows you to test your application to make sure there is no impact on your application performance or functionality because of the maintenance we have done. And if you notice any issues in your application, you can work with the support to address those issues before we do the maintenance in your production instance. And these are the settings you can define at the instance level. And further, if for any reason you would like us to delay the maintenance, you have that option as well. On the backup and recovery side, we support up to 35 days backup retention, and minimum is 1 day. So for the non-production instances, you can keep those backups up to 7 days or even 1 day if you prefer. And then by the maximum is 35 days. We do full backups every day, and then transaction log backups every 5 to 10 minutes. And using these backups, you can do point-in-time restore. We have 3 options which you can use to do the point-in-time restore. One is the latest restore point. Then you can do custom restore point. And finally, fastest restore point from your last full backups. Now, when you provision the database instance, you have an option to select geo backups, which would allow us to copy your backups to the paired Azure region, which you can use to restore your database instance in the paired region in case primary instance goes down for any region, or if you want to if you want to use these backups for disaster recovery. And you can change the setting you can configure these backups during the provisioning or post provisioning. And all these backups are encrypted using AES 256-bit encryption. Now, monitoring is another key requirement from the operations point of view. And we have comprehensive set of monitoring options to monitor these MySQL instances. We have metrics, logs, we also have workbooks and resource health, activity logs, and finally alerts. So in Azure Database for MySQL, we have 14 metrics, which we are exposing in Azure portal. You can use these metrics to monitor your database instance health and troubleshoot different performance issues. These metrics include CPU, memory, IOPS, networking related metrics, or replication lag. You can also configure alerts on these metrics if you want to notify your team in case of potential issues. And then you can also enable different server parameters for slow query logs to identify queries which are performing slow, and you can tune those later on, or enable the audit logs to monitor different activities, whether these are DDL or DML related events. And you can enable these on a individual user or set of users. And finally, diagnostic loggings, which would allow us to capture all those logs into a storage pool. And you can use Gusto queries to do custom dashboarding or alerting later on. So with that, I will spend few minutes to demo portal experience for Azure Database for MySQL. So I will spend few minutes to go through the create experience. So here we select Azure Database for MySQL. And this is Azure Database for MySQL. By default, it's a flexible server. And in the create blade, you specify the subscription resource group. You also have the option to create a resource group. I will just select one of my resource groups. You specify the server name. So I will use partner demo, the region where you want to deploy this database instance. And we support two different versions, 5.7 and 8.0. So you can select any of those versions. And then we have these workload types. We have development or hobby projects, or if you want to provision for a POC. And then these two options are for the production applications. One is for the tier 1, tier 2 application. And then you have a small or medium for tier 3, tier 4 applications, or if application is very small. So let's start with a small or medium size. And as you can see, by default, we selected 2 vCore and 8 GB RAM, 64 GB storage, and 1000 IOPS. You can change the configuration here. So if you want to allocate more storage, you can change the storage. And you can also select different VM shapes. So we are exposing all these different VM shapes. So for example, we do 4 vCore. You can specify whether you want to do the high availability or not. So let's say high availability. And then you have the option to see whether you want to do the same zone or zone redundant. So let's say we do zone redundant. And then here is the option to enable the geo backups. So if you do geo backups, so all you have to do is just select the this tick mark and then click on save. Now here is the option where you can specify availability zone. So for example, if your application is deployed in zone 2, you can select zone 2. And then you can also specify standby availability zone. Again, you can align with these your application architecture. So let's say zone availability zone for standby instances zone 3. And then you specify the username and password. And let's switch to the network configuration. So as I mentioned in the during the presentation, we have two connectivity methods, public and private. So public, you control the access based on the firewall rules. And then private, you specify the subscription. You already specify the subscription. You select the VNet and the subnet. And subnet must be delegated. So if you already have the VNet subnet, you can select those here. Otherwise, you can create these as part of the create experience. And then review plus create, and then it will create the database instance. It takes 2-3 minutes to create the database instance. And once you have this instance provisioned, then this is the overview page. So here you can see the subscription name, subscription ID, the resource group where you provision the instance, status, and which location you have used. And on the right hand side, you can use the server name, which is the endpoint you will use to connect to your database instance, the admin login name, and then the configuration you have selected, version and availability zone. So mine is non-HA configuration. That's why it's dash. And you can see the activity logs. All the activities happened over the last few minutes or few days. You can also control the access to your database instance. And this is for the diagnosis. And on the in the settings, we are exposing different options. So this is for the scale up, scale down. If you want to change the configuration of your database instance. For the networking, I'm using private access, but if you have the public access, you can change the firewall rules here. And in the databases, you can see all the different databases you have created. If you want to create a new database, you can simply specify the database name, character set, and collation. And finally, on the this is the connection settings. So we are exposing connection settings for different programming frameworks, ADO.NET, JDBC, Node.js. So you can use these connection strings based on your application framework. And here we have the server parameters we are exposing. So like I said, we are literally exposing tens of parameters which you can use to fine tune your database instance. And you can also search these parameters based on different search patterns. So for example, for slow, any parameter which has the slow name will come up here, and then you can change these different values. This is for the replication. So we support up to 10 read replicas. And today we support read replicas within the same region where you have the primary instance. But in near future, in next 3-4 months, we will have the option to support cross-region read replicas. But provisioning read replica is fairly straightforward. You can click on the add read replica, specify the server name, and that's pretty much it. By default, it will have the same configuration as your primary instance. But later on, if you prefer to change it, you can do that. Then we have the maintenance, where you can specify the maintenance for your database instance. So as I mentioned previous, we support two options, system and custom schedule. In the custom schedule, you have the option to choose 1 hour window, any day of the week. And in a month or so, we plan to introduce another feature where you can choose any day, any hour-long window, any day of the month. Here you have the high availability option. So you can enable HA, you can disable HA if you want to change this configuration later on. And this is for the backups. So these are the backups happened over the last 7 days. And you can use any of these backups to do the fastest restore. And then on the monitoring side, as I mentioned, we expose 14 different metrics. So you can see all these metrics. And you can select any of those metrics here. And then I don't have the replication lag. So, but let's say I have this backup storage used. You can see these different metrics and also generate the alerts. And also want to briefly mention about the workbooks we are exposing here. So one is to have the overview of your database instance. Then second is for the auditing. And then finally for the query performance insight. So with that, I hope this presentation is helpful. And as Brian mentioned, if you have any feedback, please let us know. Or if there is a particular topic which interests you, let us know as well. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Avnish, thank you so much. That was a great overview and really appreciate it. And I'm sure it's really helpful. So please, if you're watching this live, you can let us know in the chat if you have any feedback on future sessions, or as mentioned earlier on, directly through our portal where we have all of our content. You can leave us feedback there. Coming up over the next few sessions that we've got, Avnish will be diving into the roadmap a little bit, some deployment options using CLI, PowerShell. Some of the high availability disaster recovery features in Flexible Server, and then also some migration strategies for moving databases into Azure, including offline and near zero downtime migration. So we look forward to those. In the meantime, we look forward to also hearing your feedback. And in the meantime, thank you very much for attending, and have a great day.